Hello, everyone. My name is Christina Previtt, and I am on faculty here with ICE for the Modern Management of the Older Adult course. I am so excited to be back here every second week. I'm getting way less nervous as I come up. A couple of announcements. I can't believe that it's already the 13th of December. But as we approach the new year, that means that we have a couple of new cohorts that are starting, which includes our inaugural start to the Modern Management of the Older Adult course with myself and with Dustin. So we start January 8th. I'm so excited. The course is starting to come together and it's going to look amazing. We also have a cohort for the APHPT, the Academy for Health Promotion and Prevention Therapies, starting on the 8th as well. So if you're on the fence about signing up for either of these courses, you should definitely jump on board. It's the perfect way to start a New Year's resolution about doing more continuing ed. Okay, so today I thought that we would talk a little bit about gait speed. With older adults, especially community dwelling, independent older adults, gait speed is often used as a cutoff point for many adverse events. So what the research has shown us is that gait speed can be predictive of negative health consequences, including loss of independence, loss of functional mobility, increased hospitalization stays, increased risk of falls, things like that. And often the cutoff point is anywhere between 0.8 and 1.0 meters per second. And that's been pretty well established in the literature. But I'm going to play devil's advocate and say, is that cutoff a true cutoff? And what else do we need to be considering when we're looking at gait speed? So there was a study that was published by a group in Pittsburgh in 2015 that was looking at gait speed and looking at differences in gait speed depending on how gait speed was measured. So here's the problem with a lot of these outcome measures that we use commonly in clinical practice is that they aren't standardized. What I mean by that is that people use different protocols to establish a person's baseline gait speed. And based on some of those different variables, we can have a hugely different outcome. For example, for gait speed, sometimes people use an aspect of the short physical performance battery, which has a person start from a dead stop and walk 4 meters using a manual stopwatch. Others will do a 6-minute walk test, divide it by 360 seconds. Ooh, I'm doing math early in the morning. 360 seconds, use a manual stopwatch, calculate the distance, and get a usual gait speed. The other thing is the language that we use when we're talking about gait speed. Some people say, walk at a usual pace. Others say walk as quickly as you can for this amount of distance. Those are going to have hugely different implications and interpretations for a clinician who is working in a variety of settings from the hospital to private practice. And so I think that we need to be careful when we're looking at some of these differences, because this group in 2015 found that there was a difference between 0.1 and 0.2 meters per second, which is huge because it can be between being 0.8 and being at that cutoff with the physiotherapist making recommendations that they may not be independent in ambulating at home, to 1.0 or 1.2 where we're saying, they're at risk for some decline, but they're doing okay. The other thing that we need to think about with gait speed is, are we allowing enough time for acceleration and deceleration? Because that's going to throw off our average measurements. We're not going, if we're taking the beginning to 4 meters, and it may take an individual a meter just to increase speed to a usual speed for them, then it's going to throw all of our measurements off. And so where do we go from here? What's the end game? What's the clinical bottom line here? Well, for one, us as researchers, we need to be more standardized and make sure that we're making comparison within the same gait speed protocol. Number 2 is that I think that if we're doing gait speed in practice, it's as long as we are being consistent when we're testing and retesting, then we're able to see improvements across our own interventions. So if we have a person that comes into our clinic and we're seeing them at 0.8, and if you've seen a person at a true 0.8 meters per second, even a true 1.0 meters per second, they're usually having quite a bit of difficulty. Their gait is not steady. They are probably feeling a little bit off balance. And so we can use that within almost like a retest to look at the efficacy of our interventions as one way, as long as we are standardizing within our own protocols. I know some people in home health have this exact same issue. If you're going into somebody's home, you're not going to have this clean hallway that is going to look exactly the same from person A to person Z. And because of that, we need to be taking that into consideration. So as much as we're using that 0.8, 1.0 to guide our clinical reasoning, we need to make sure that we're, being critical in how we are looking at this individual. And so when I'm looking at somebody's gait speed, the other thing that we're seeing in some of the literature is that we often look for statistically significant findings, and we don't necessarily relate that to clinically meaningful findings. And there's positives and minuses. Part of it is the way that research is conducted and what journals are looking for, and the way that we try to evaluate change over time. I'm in the research world. I know the pros and cons to that. And so the other question is, are we looking at something that's statistically significant, or are we looking at something that's clinically meaningful? And some would argue that if you're going below 0.6 and you're getting up to 0.8, that may not be clinically meaningful, because they may still be having a lot of issues with moving around their environment. And so they probably should be boosted up to 1.0 or 1.2. The other thing is, because these cutoffs have been made with statistics, we also have degrees of error and confidence intervals. And there's been some really interesting literature that's come out over the last couple of years, I think. I have to pull up the paper, that's saying that because of these huge confidence intervals, we're trying to categorize people into community non-ambulators, community ambulators, etc. But there's so much blurriness in the way that these confidence intervals are overlapping that it may not be as cut and dry as we think that it is. Okay, so we're still using this 0.8, 1.0 meters per second. I would say in private practice, I'm looking towards a higher end. Maybe in more of a hospital setting, I might be looking a little bit lower. So I have 1.0 meters per second, but it's blurry, and sometimes it could mean different things. And so what else am I going to look for? And so I think that it's really important to think about some of the goals of that individual. So is the speed at which they are walking, is that going to be clinically meaningful for them? For example, are they feeling like they cannot keep up with their husband or their spouse in their chores and things that they're doing around their home or their community? And if that's true, then that may be a goal that has gait speed as the main marker that we measure pre to post. But the other thing that I think about is that it is one tool in my toolbox, because I use it all the time in my clinical practice. But I also use a gait evaluation. So I'm looking at mechanics in gait, and it's allowing me to have an idea about where I'm going to place my focus when it comes to my interventions. And what do I mean by that? So if I have an individual coming into my clinic, they're at 0.8, 1.0, very close to that kind of threshold around community ambulation. They may or may not have a gait aid. So if they're kind of in that, they're in that 0.8 to 1.0, they're seeing increased lateral sway, but they're not using a walker or a gait aid right now, that might be a conversation that I'll start with them. Is this appropriate? Should we maybe be thinking about getting you with a cane or a walker, especially for long distances? Are you easily fatigued? All of those type of things will start becoming an education piece with my client. The other thing is that if they are slow walking, is it a strength issue? Is it a mechanics issue? Is it specific muscles that are weaker relative to the entire body that we need to focus on? Is it a power issue? We see that as older adults progress, especially over their, between 50 and 70, we start to see declines in muscle mass and power, but it accelerates after the age of 70, with power potentially being more important than raw strength. Maybe it's a power issue. They just don't have that great toe extension and they're really not able to propel their body forward. And so that may be something that we work on based on not only gait speed, but also gait assessment. And those are just the types of things that go through my mind as I'm using this gait assessment, that it's kind of one of the clinical tools that I use, but there's a lot more information rather than just the number gait speed that I get by watching a person ambulate, whether it be in a standardized protocol for gait speed or it just be with them coming into the clinic. All right, I'm a little bit shorter today, but I just wanted to kind of put in that devil's advocate about gait speed. It's going to be something that we're talking about in the Modern Management for Older Adults course. So if you guys are interested, leave a comment below and we will definitely talk a little bit more about that. If I don't see you guys or I don't talk to you guys, have a very happy holiday and enjoy all the time with family and friends, because that is what it is all about. All right, guys, have a great day. Bye.